So yeah, before I begin this review proper, I'd like to bring up this tidbit from my April 2011 review of WWF In Your House for the original Sony PlayStation. But I do have the PC version, and in that version, you have the wrestler's theme song playing during their stage. And also, if you pop the CD into a CD player, you could actually play the tracks as you would a regular CD, so it's sort of like getting a mini soundtrack as a bonus. But in this PlayStation version, no music. Now at the time of recording, I have yet to play the PlayStation version of WrestleMania the arcade game, and thus assumed that the lack of music was due to laziness or some other reason, as far as In Your House goes. Unfortunately, the same can be applied to WrestleMania the arcade game for PlayStation. In-ring action sports, no music whatsoever, only during character select and end credits. That's it, that's all. Funny thing is, I know for sure that the arcade game had music. There's even music in the Genesis and Super Nintendo versions. It's even on PC CD-ROM for MS-DOS. I thought this was only an issue with In Your House because, you know, what isn't an issue in that game? But this revelation only brings my opinion of that game even far below because they never bothered to fix the problem. Oh well. Getting past the lack of in-game music, WWF Wrestlemania the arcade game is actually pretty playable on the Sony PlayStation. Perhaps the most respectable version you're going to be getting on the console front back in those days. I myself prefer the PC CD-ROM MS-DOS version, but I digress. In any case, all 8 WWF superstars from the arcade original are in this game. Bret's in there, Bam Bam's in there, Yoko's in there. It plays at a rather decent speed. You have most of the arcade commentary provided by Vince McMahon and Jerry the King Lawler. Controls responsive for the most part, and the extra trigger buttons on the PlayStation controllers allows you to map certain button combinations to single buttons for slicker access to additional abilities such as running and grappling. Hell, you even have Howard Finkel welcoming you to the game, something that's not even present on the 16-bit versions. So yeah, this is actually a pretty slick little version of WrestleMania the arcade game, albeit with some drawbacks, most notably the loading times, which is unfortunately unavoidable considering it's a CD-ROM game. But now for those of you who are unfamiliar with WrestleMania the arcade game, it's essentially a crossbreed between sports entertainment and Mortal Kombat. Basically, they digitized the actual WWF wrestlers of the day and they put them into the game. There aren't any fatalities in the purest sense of the word, and the closest thing you're going to have to blood are the various items that fly out of the superstar after a particularly hard hit. Although you have the traditional wrestling maneuvers at your disposal, you also have an assortment of extravagant special abilities that would otherwise be impossible to pull off in a practical, actual wrestling match, such as Yoko's Nuna's bucket attack, Doink's electric joy buzzer, and The Undertaker's tombstone. No, I mean an actual headstone that he smashes over some of these guys, not the actual pile driver. That's barely touching on all the crazy crap that goes on in here. Anyways, continuing on with the automated instruction manual. On an average single-player game, your chosen superstar can choose to compete for either the Intercontinental Championship or the big one, the World Wrestling Federation Heavyweight title. Both paths determine the type of opposition you'll be facing in the 7 matches you'll be competing in, with the IC title path comprising several one-on-one matches and a few handicap matches against 2 or 3 opponents. Meanwhile, the World Wrestling Federation title path hosts all handicap matches and concludes with a Royal Rumble type match, or as they call it, a WrestleMania challenge, where you have to defeat all 8 of your opponents before laying claim to the prize. Regardless of which mode you play, the ending's pretty much the same thing. Your wrestler's in the middle of the ring and fireworks are exploding all around you, and you know, it's a big celebration. Controlling the wrestlers are a simple enough affair, 2 sets of punches and kicks, a block button, much like in Mortal Kombat. Hey, Midway did this, they did Mortal Kombat, it makes sense. And from here you can perform a variety of button combinations to execute any number of special moves unique to your superstar, or sometimes not. At times you'll get damage bonuses for inflicting the first blow, high-risk maneuvers, and other things. I found the control to be fairly responsive at times, though I will admit there were a few instances where the moves didn't execute when I wanted to, but these are few in between, and for the most part I found the controls to be fairly responsive. Certainly not as bad as the Super Nintendo version for that matter, which, yeah, we'll get to that some other time. Presentation-wise, the game is close enough to the arcade original as home consoles were going to get at the time. If anything, it slightly edges out the MS-DOS version in terms of visual quality, with slightly more colors and possibly better typography. I'm probably digging in too deep because in general it looks pretty good and the game flows rather smoothly with few slowdown instances. Likewise, sound quality is actually pretty good. While there's no in-game music playing during the main game, you do get snippets of music on the character select screen and they sound pretty decent. Of course, there's always the various voice bites from the various superstars and commentary from Vinnie Mac and the King, which is always funny stuff for a variety of reasons. Personally, I think the commentary in this game is probably the best wrestling commentary I've ever come across, especially compared to the mediocre efforts of today's wrestling games. But I digress. In conclusion, WWF Wrestlemania the arcade game has done some level of justice on the Sony PlayStation with a near accurate conversion of the arcade original. The loading times are a bit of a nuisance, especially during the final challenge match where the game pauses to load up the next superstar, and the lack of in-game music is notable if nothing else, but still, this is a drastic step above the 16-bit iterations of the same game, and still pretty fun to play today. I recall picking this one up for about a couple bucks, so it's a pretty cheap game. If you enjoyed the WrestleMania arcade game from way back when, then chances are you'll enjoy this PlayStation iteration just as much. However, if you didn't care for the game back in the day, then this isn't going to change your mind anytime soon. WrestleMania the arcade game is far from the deepest wrestling game you'll ever come across, and it's pretty bare bones compared to what would come later on, but it has its moments and it can be fun to play on a rainy day. And at the end of the day, it's still a much better game than In Your House. Just saying.